In 1911, Jacob Hitchens, the patriarch of the Hitchens family, passed away, leaving his possessions mostly in part to his son, Robert Hitchens. Robert's sister, May, contested this inheritance. May cited that she was raising a family and that they were supposed to share distribution. Robert and May became embroiled in a family battle over possessions. May frequently argued with her brother, who had threatened to kill her, and struck her often. Once, he even chased her with a knife. In 1918, May's husband, James A. Carey, died of pneumonia, which put further pressure on May and the prosperity of her farm. The Carey family consisted of Mother May and her sons, Lawrence, Howard, and James. It wasn't long even deeper resentment ensued between the two Hitchens siblings over their long-dead father's property. Starting October 1927, May plotted for over a month to have her brother Robert killed. Her sons, especially little Lawrence Carey, who was only 13 years old at the time, begged her not to do this. She ordered her obedient son James to shoot her son Howard if he refused to kill her brother. On November 7th, when Robert Hitchens went out for bread, he was followed by one of the boys. While he was gone, May and her two older sons entered the home of Robert Hitchens. Robert casually walked in carrying a pipe and had gone to the stove to light it when he was struck over the head. On November 9, 1927, 20-year-old Howard Hitchens of Georgetown, Delaware, was growing concerned for his uncle, Robert, whom he had not seen in several days. When he went to the man's home in nearby Frankfort, he found him bitten to death in a blood-splattered room. When police arrived, they found the 55-year-old farmer and auto mechanic crouched in a corner, as if he died in a last effort to ward off blows which fractured his skull in 3 places and inflicted 16 other wounds. Robert, who was unmarried and described as sober and industrious, was known throughout southern Delaware as well-to-do. Police theorized that he arrived home to find robbers in his house, who then overpowered and bludgeoned him to death. The coroner said he had probably been dead for 2 or 3 days, which made it more difficult to talk to witnesses who might have seen anything. After his death, a $2,000 life insurance policy was paid out to his sister, May Hitchens Carey, a widowed mother to 3 boys, including Howard. After she paid for Robert's funeral expenses and settled his estate, she was left with $900. The crime went unsolved for 7 years until police got a break in the case on December 5, 1934, when May's youngest son, Lawrence, was caught burglarizing a house. When questioned about his uncle's murder, the 21-year-old told police that he heard his mother and 2 older brothers, Howard and James, planning his uncle's death. His mother promised Howard a new car if he helped her kill his uncle. On the day of the murder, November 7th, his mother sent him to a general store, where his uncle liked to hang out, to see if he was still there. Lawrence, who was just 14 years old at the time, found his uncle there and reported back to his mother. She then took Howard and James with her to Robert's house, where they waited inside for him to come home. After Lawrence gave his confession, Delaware investigators quietly arrested and questioned James, who confirmed the story. He told police that when his uncle came home, his brother Howard knocked him half senseless with a club made of white oak. His mother then attacked her own brother with a sledgehammer, and together, The three beat Robert Hitchens to death. When they were finished, May poured whiskey into her brother's mouth, spilled some on his clothes, and then shattered some drinking glasses on the floor. James, who was just 16 years old at the time, then told police that three of them returned to their home in Georgetown, where they burned their clothes and buried the club and sledgehammer. On Friday, December 7, 1934, 56-year-old May Carey and her son, Howard, were arrested and charged with first-degree murder. Both mother and son denied the charges. However, during their one-day trial held on April 8, 1935, May took responsibility for the crime and said, "I drove the children to do it." Howard agreed, and in a last-minute plea to the jury, he blamed his mother for coercing him to kill his uncle. After 3 hours of deliberation, the jury found May and Howard guilty of first-degree murder with a sentencing recommendation of mercy. For his part, James was convicted of second-degree murder. In Delaware, as in other states, a first-degree murder conviction typically meant a death sentence. Juries could make recommendations, but the decision was usually left to the presiding judge. Because she was a woman in an era when women seldom received death sentences, newspapers confidently predicted May would be sentenced to life in prison. Since she was the architect of the crime, and took responsibility, many believed Howard would also receive a sentence of life in prison. And in the 1930s, life in prison did not mean life in prison. Instead, May could expect to be paroled in less than 10 years, while Howard would likely have to serve 10 to 20 before he was released. When sentencing was handed down on April 26, the judge refused a defense motion for a new trial. He then went on to describe the crime as the most vicious in the criminal annals of the state, and that the law makes no exceptions to sex. He then sentenced both mother and son to death by hanging in the Sussex County Jail near Georgetown on June 7. May Carey, who expected the judge to follow the jury's recommendation of mercy, screamed hysterically as the court imposed the penalty. Due to a quirk in Delaware law at the time, the particulars of the Carey's case, or both, June 7th was a solid date for the mother and son execution. There would be no appeals. They each spent their last night alive in adjacent cells with their own spiritual advisors with whom they prayed and sang hymns, the guards occasionally joining in. They ate cake and ice cream together around 2 a.m., then slept a little before resuming their prayers and discussions of forgiveness and the afterlife. At 5:02 that morning, May Carey was led away from her cell, and when she passed by her son she turned to him crying and said, "Goodbye, Howard." "Goodbye, boy." "Goodbye, mother," he replied. From the cell block she was taken outside to the main courtyard where the state-owned gallows were assembled. It was surrounded by a high board fence and canvas roof that had been hastily built to conceal the execution according to Delaware law, the spectacle of public executions having long since passed. Tight-lipped and dry-eyed, she walked unassisted up the 13 steps to the top of the scaffold. Just before the black hood was placed over her head, she said half defiantly and with a wavering voice, "My way is clear. I have nothing else to say." At 5:07 the trapdoor gave way, and the bound and hooded figure of a 55-year-old gray-haired grandmother dropped quickly and jerked hard when the thick rope reached its limit. She was allowed to hang there for 17 minutes before she was declared dead. 17 minutes were never more longer when officials stood there watching a bound, hooded dead woman swinging gently back and forth, back and forth. Howard was taken from his cell at 5:31 and he walked the same 100 feet his mother had just taken. Like her, he needed no assistance as he walked steadily up the 13 steps. At the top, before the black hood was placed over his head, he gave the 12 jurors, who were legally required to be there, Sussex County Sheriff, and the prison physician his last words. "Gentlemen," he began, "what I did was against my will. I am sure anyone in my place would have done the same. I hope to see my 3 little ones on the other side." He did not mention his wife, Myra, and as the black hood was adjusted, he began mumbling a prayer. He was still reciting that prayer when the trap was sprung at 5:41. He hung there, twitching at first, then swaying, like his mother did, for 19 long minutes. Finally, at 6 o'clock, he was declared dead. 2 hours later, both mother and son were buried together at St. George's Cemetery, located on a mountain near Frankfurt. More than 70 family and friends attended their funeral. The whole family was destroyed by May's jealousy. May's son James Carey died of a heart problem at age 32 after many years in the workhouse. Lawrence Carey served 5 years in jail, later joined the military, and nothing can be found of him after this. Harvey E. Murr received a sentence of life imprisonment for the murder of Myra Carey. The family was lost to tragedy, but through the records that exist of the children, they were able to move on and start lives of their own all over the United States. Thank you for watching Death Row.